Okay, I am here, Laurie Wheeler of Wellness Within, and I am speaking today with Dr. Glenn Raine. And so I would like to introduce him. He is a quantum and bioelectromagnetic uh, working in scientist, research scientist in the emerging field of energy medicine. He's a biologist working in subtle energy sciences. He has a PhD from Stanford University, Harvard University, and the University of London. He's worked with heart math and a professor at Mount Sinai Hospital. He delivers many keynote lectures and has many published scientific research information. I've looked it up. It is as long as you could imagine, the amount of information that he has published, and articles on DNA, water, consciousness, and self-healing. He is an amazing person to work with, and absolutely, I am honored to work with him for these last couple years. Specifically, we are working on the conductivity of electricity in how it affects DNA. Did I say that right, Glenn?
Well, hi, folks. Sort of. And for the record, my PhD, I only have one PhD, not three different PhDs in three different locations. The PhD was from the University of London. I
Okay.
also worked at Stanford and Harvard and all those funky places. And for the record, I left academia because really could not do the kind of work that I wanted to do and am doing with Laurie at a university that's just too unconventional. So, okay, so what I've been doing is measuring energy because that's my thing. I realize that it's the energy that heals the body and it's the energy that controls the self-healing process. So I gave up the whole biochemistry route and focused on the energy. And I've been focusing on electrical energy because it's something we can measure relatively easily. There are lots of electrical engineers out there who have developed very sensitive methods for measuring electrical energy. Now, most people don't measure electrical energy in the body or in biological molecules, but I do. And what's particularly important is well, there are two aspects of this. There's the intrinsic energy of the material, and then there's the energy that you put into it. And I usually use healers, although done a lot of work with electromagnetic fields and scalar energy and plasma energy and sound energy. But lately, or the work we're going to talk about here today with Laurie is divine, spiritual, cosmic, whatever you want to call it, energy that comes from the entities that she channels and brings down or has access to. And they're out to, I've done a lot of work before with different healers, but that's, the healers themselves, or maybe the healers are acting as a channel. Nobody seems to know for sure, but everyone has a different twist on energy medicine, as you said in the introduction, healing with energy. So our experiments are kind of unique because because of Laurie's skill to be able to bring down very specific kinds of energies. Okay, so that's the treatment, or she uses the word activation sometimes. Now, as far as what I measure the electrical conductivity, but actually I measure the resistance or impedance, which is an electrical parameter related to conductivity. And I have a very sensitive machine, which is actually called an impedance spectrophotometer for all you science geeks out there. And this machine is rather, it measures all kinds of electrical properties. It measures impedance, resistance, capacitance, conductivity, etc. And what's very unique about this particular machine is that it allows me to take these measurements at different frequencies. So if you were going to buy a regular conductivity meter and stick it in the water before and after a healer, you're going to be taking your measurements at 2 kilohertz, which is an arbitrary frequency, which is totally the wrong way to go about measuring the electrical properties of a sample. You have to take your measurements at a resonance frequency of the material. So before we did any experiments, I had done experiments measuring the resonance frequency of the material, whether it's DNA or water. And that's yet another machine, but it is a standard way to measure frequencies of a material. And that was done by a device from Australia called the Clever Scope, which measures frequencies. And then when you have then I chose one of the strong resonance frequencies and then use that frequency to take all the electrical measurements. So it's not just some arbitrary frequency like 2 kilohertz. It's a resonance frequency of the target. And when you do it this way, the whole procedure is very, very sensitive and can measure the differences in the DNA or the water after being treated with various subtle energies. Okay, so that's the introduction. So we did several different kinds of experiments. We treated water direct. No, the water was not treated. We mostly were treating DNA with different kinds of energies. But then the question was, and then we wanted to know if we could store that energy, because for mankind to be able to use this kind of energy, treating one person at a time is a very inefficient way to get all this divine energy that's coming through Laurie into a person. So we then started to ask the questions, well, what about carriers? Can we put the energy into a crystal? Can we put the energy into water? Can we put the energy into different inert carriers? And we did different experiments like that as well. And then we asked the question, well, yes, the energy is in the carrier. How long does the energy last? Can you do it, a month later? Does it last? How long does it last? So we did experiments like that as well, with the ultimate goal of being able to put the different forms of energy into a carrier and then make it available to people to heal. Okay, so that's my introduction. Do you want to add anything to that, Laurie?
Well, first I'd like to say, and before we even spoke on this interview, we talked about this whole process. It's a whole story. So we are talking about pieces of this story, but it's much larger than what we're talking about specifically today. And also that you have mentioned to me that nobody has studied the effect of frequency on DNA, and that there are very few technologies, I believe you mentioned, with 50% or higher effect on DNA. So,
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, yes, that's true. But before we get to the rigorous details,
okay.
uh, well, we could just jump right in and start talking about the results. But I just wanted you to give them like a little bit of an introduction between what's the difference between activating a sample and treating a sample, for example.
Okay, so my understanding, and this is the way I've always worked for 30 years now, is that I, as a person, am not the one who's putting my own energy into something. As someone who works in the healing capabilities, we open ourselves and we are the transmitters. So we know that DNA is like an antenna. It transmits and receives in a constant flow. And so as this happens, I'm receiving information from whomever the being, the spirit, the energy, particular energy that's coming in and acting as the conduit to bring it into what the subject matter is, whether it be a person or like what we've been testing and researching is just DNA itself. And if you could just mention, Glenn, that this DNA is not any one specific person's DNA, just tell a little bit so that people understand,
Right.
well, what's DNA, you know, what is this? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so that's the energy treatment, and then the material that we're zapping is either well, several different kinds of material, but the DNA itself you can buy from your local drugstore. Not well, it's not really a drugstore. It's a chemical supply company that sells pure DNA, 99.9% pure DNA. So in order to get that, you got to get rid of the fats and the sugars and the proteins and all of the other stuff that's in the body. DNA comes from the body. So where do they get it from? They don't get it from blood because they sell it in large quantities. So they get it from human placenta. And what they do is they pool placenta from many women and they put them all in all these placentas. You can visualize it into a big blender and blend them all up. You add a little water, actually only water, and then they have to go through all the purification procedure because they got to get rid of everything but the DNA, the sugars and the carbohydrates and the proteins and all that. And they do this as part of the biochemical techniques, that standard techniques, and then they end up with the pure DNA, and then they dry it and get rid of all the water. So I buy it as a powder, and then I resuspend it in water. So this is DNA from many different people. It is human DNA. It is DNA in a double helix, but they're small pieces. Unlike the DNA in the human body, which is a very long piece. I mean, the amount of DNA inside the nucleus of the body is very very long. I mean, I'm not sure. Like, could be a mile long. I mean, there's a lot of DNA jam packed in our nucleus, in our cells. But the point is that the DNA that we're measuring, yeah, okay, I just explained where it came from, but it's also in a water environment. I don't add salts or sugars or anything else because I just want to study the effects of the energy on the pure DNA molecule. And so I use distilled water. So in a way, it's sort of an artificial environment. It's certainly not the way DNA is in the body, but it is DNA, human DNA in a double helix shape. So it's just a build, uh, fundamental molecule without all the other peripheral stuff around it. So that's a good point. And it is sensitive to DNA, even in this form, as Laurie said. It emits energy, which has been measured in the electromagnetic domain. And a guy in Germany claims to have measured scalar energy coming from DNA. And it's very sensitive to energy, which is why we've been using it. So the first series of experiments we did were kind of unusual in that, again, as Laurie said, it's not her energy, but she opens up the channels so that various entities can come through. And in this case, we worked with three different entities. Laurie, you want to describe the three different beings that came through? Mega.
Yes. So mega is short for megalithicon, and mega I've nicknamed or it nicknamed itself. It is by its name, you can understand megalithicon. It's an enormous, vast energy, and it is a very high energy. And it has been with me transmitting information for years now. And it's what I call my go-to when I need some information or whatever, it would be my first go-to because it is there as my guidance and brings information about what's happening in the world, what happens specifically for me, what happens with anyone that I ask about. So it's there all the time guiding me. And then I think the next one that we have recorded was the Arcturian commander Ashtar, which I've worked with many times. I've actually been up on the galactic, one of the galactic starships. Um, and he heads up a certain portion of that. And so I called him in and asked if he would transmit. And there was a specific kind of interesting finding we'll talk about in a minute. And then also, I wanted to have a difference of these three types of beings and their energy. So the third one I requested that I've been working with for quite a while was Mary Magdalena. And so she came in also and transmitted for us. So these are, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah,
If
those
you
are,
can
those are,
explain a little bit about, it's not a specific frequency, but that it's a band of frequency. So if you, can you just describe a little bit what the difference might be?
well, I don't know what the difference is. These
Oh,
are entities. You use the word frequency, but when I think of frequency, I think of a machine that has a dials, and I can, change the frequency. I mean, all energy is composed of frequency, but that's not the only thing the energy is composed of.
right.
And now we're talking about electromagnetic energy that scientists know about, kind of energy that Laurie's dealing with. We have no idea if it's electromagnetic, if it's scalar, if it's quantum, if it's probably some kind of energy, or I call it divine energy because we don't know what it is. And that's why these experiments are kind of unusual. I, as a background, have done a lot of experiments with electromagnetic fields and scalar energies at specific frequencies. And the ability to affect DNA is frequency dependent. Some
Mhm.
frequencies work better than others. Solfeggio frequencies, for example, are actually quite effective at changing the DNA, changing the electrical properties of the DNA, changing the conductivity of the DNA, which is what I'm going to be sharing because that's something that most people can relate to. And when I start talking about impedance, then the people go, well, what does that mean? So I'm giving you the bottom line here is the conductivity, the changes in the conductivity before and after a treatment. And then I present the data as a percent change. That's the difference between before and after divided by the original value, before value. Now, the percent change can vary enormously from treatment to treatment. So let me just explain a little bit about what happens with ordinary electromagnetic energy and scalar energy to give you a perspective to know how and why the energies are so different that Laurie's working with. Electromagnetic fields do have an effect on DNA, and the magnitude of the effect is usually about 20 to 30% in that ballpark. The experimental error is probably, well, is exactly 8%. So that means if I don't do anything to the DNA and then I take a measurement an hour later, because I like to, the change is about 8%. So the time course is about an hour. I give the DNA time to absorb the information in its environment, to respond to the information in its environment, and to actually cause a physical effect or measuring an electrical effect. You need to have when I say physical effect, you have to, it's not the etheric properties of the DNA that we're talking about here. We're talking about the physical, electrical, chemical, etc. So that takes time. At the etheric level, these changes probably occur in a matter of seconds or maybe minutes. And I have done some experiments with radionics supporting that statement. But when you talk about actual measurements with a machine, then it takes time. So I don't know how much time it takes, because whether these changes occur in 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 60 minutes, that's a whole different question. And there's so many variables here. I haven't really studied that. And it depends on that kind of energy. Some energies probably can produce a physical change in the DNA molecule after minutes or seconds, and some take a longer time. The few experiments I have done like that indicate that it's enormously variable. Okay, anyway, so
And Glenn,
that's
can I just stop you there for a
yeah,
minute? I
sure.
would imagine that that also has something to do with which particular energy is having the effect, who is it, let's just say, for the sake of, where's the energy coming from
Right.
as to why it's affecting in different ways.
Okay. Good point. I so far have only been talking about electromagnetic energy and scalar energy,
Okay.
which is from a machine. You dial in the thing, you push the button, and the energy comes on. So let's start with that, because that itself turns out to be really complicated. When you do the same experiment, for example, with at a specific frequency, like 432 hertz, which is a solfeggio frequency, that's a frequency the DNA really resonates with and loves that frequency, and I do an experiment and I get a 40% effect or 30% effect. And then I do the experiment the next day and it's down to 15%. And I'm going, and then I do it the third day and it could be back up or no effect at all. So I'm still trying to figure out what are the many different variables in the environment that affect the DNA from day to day. I mean, the phases of the moon do make a difference. I've done some experiments with that. Whether it's an electric storm or a weather front that comes in, who knows? I mean, maybe my mood does vary from day to day, and I'm a part of the experiment. My energy is part of the experiment because I'm handling the DNA and manipulating it and putting it in the machine, taking measurements. So you have to realize that can vary enormously just with an electromagnetic field. Okay, now when you start talking about healing energy, what Laurie just said is very true. And when a particular healer works, do they produce the same effect every time? No. Do they channel the same entity every time? Who knows? A lot of healers don't even know, they open themselves up to divine energy, and they don't know what kind of energy comes through. Laurie is kind of unique in that sense. She can tell you exactly, who came through in a given experiment. So bearing all this in mind, interpreting the results gets a little complicated. So, for example, the experiment that we did with the three entities, 1, 2, and 3, Mega, the Arcturian, Commander, and Mary. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. So the first experiment we did, we got a 55% effect, 29%, and a 40% effect from each of these entities, which is really, between 30 and 50%. That's more or less the same.
And that
So
was the
then
initial, right,
that
Glenn?
was the
That was
very
just initially. Okay,
the initial effect.
right.
Okay, and now, so I'm just talking about, and then we did it again, and the numbers were different. Mary, for example, the second treatment went from 40% to 90%. So that's more than twofold more effective. Why is that? We don't know. What was Laurie a better channel, vehicle
Conduit.
for channeling the energy, or did Mary just have a bad day the first time we did it? Maybe she had a bad hair day, and the second time she did it, she was really on. We don't know. And then there's, as I said, the environment. I mean, these guys are bringing their energy from God knows what dimension into our dimensional, 4-dimensional reality, space and time, and then into Laurie's body, assumedly. And Laurie's body as a vehicle is going to change from day to day. So it depends on what she eats and all this stuff. So it's very complicated, and it's not surprising that we can get gee, and then the Altarian commander, the first time we did it was 29%, and the second time we did it, it was 70%. Okay, so right, and with Mega, it was the other way around. It was he was less effective, or they were less effective the second time they did it. So it's not obvious at all to understand what's going on. But to make things even more complicated, not only can you get a change in the magnitude of the effect, you can also get a change in the direction of the effect. So sometimes they will an entity will increase the conductivity of DNA, and then you do the experiment a week later, and then they decrease the conductivity of DNA. So that makes it even more complicated. And I have no idea why that is, other than as I said, the source of the energy may vary, and by the time it gets into Laurie's body, or any healer for that matter, it's going to change. So that is something that everyone should be aware about. And for the record, I can get the same phenomena even with an electromagnetic field. Some days the effect is reversed. It's in the opposite direction, the opposite polarity. And this makes my life as a scientist very difficult, because I'm trying to be scientific about this, and trying to show that the phenomena that we're talking about is reproducible. Because if it's not reproducible, scientists will say, well, it's not real. So there we go. Okay, so that's background, experiment number one, and then and two, and then we asked the question, how long does it last? If we can measure the effect, 24 hours later, is it the same? Is it gone? And the answer to that was, is an interesting phenomenon in itself. In some kind of treatments, the energy grows over time. So what
Mm.
does that mean? So the
Important point,
energy,
though. Important point.
it's an
It's an
important point,
important point.
right?
Yeah, because we
Why
don't
I'm isolating
realize that actually occurs. We don't see it, in other words. It's not something that we're greatly aware of in our conscious mind. Like, we're not looking at it saying, oh, that's grown. We're not always aware of it. So I think it's an important point for everybody to really understand that in our findings, we did find that it grew. The numbers
over
grew.
time. So
Yeah.
the magnitude of what
Right.
does that mean? That means the magnitude of the effect, actually in all three entities that you channel, after 24 hours, it was as much as twice as strong as it was after the initial measurement. So the interpretation of that is even more complicated, because
Yeah.
where's the extra energy coming from? If you leave DNA, I could tell you, in a control situation, if you leave DNA just sit around for 24 hours, the conductivity decreases
Mm.
as the molecule falls apart over 24 hours. It's relatively stable, but the conductivity does decrease over time without any treatment. So the fact that it's increasing over time with a treatment indicates to me that there's more energy coming from somewhere. Now, over the 24 hours, it's just sitting there. It's not at Laurie's. Well, I don't know. Were you did you stay connected to the sample? Did you keep feeding it
No,
your
no,
energy,
not at
or
all.
Mega's energy? No.
No.
So where's the energy coming from? And the answer to that is we don't know. Now, we don't know what Mega is doing for the 24 hours after they treat the sample. They're probably standing there discussing and saying, Well, well, let's confuse them. Let's keep pumping energy into the molecule so that when he remeasures it 24 hours later, it'll be stronger. And that'll really confuse everybody. Who knows what these guys are doing during the 24 hours? And then, of
Or
course, as I
even, or Glenn, even if they are not, they specifically,
doing,
whoever the
yeah,
energy is coming from, even if they're not doing anything, but that it's interactive, now that it's connected to the DNA, what is the DNA now receiving energetically? What is it doing? Because my sense is that they are not doing anything, that they have transmitted, and now it is what the connection that is actually happening. Because I believe if you took individual DNA from every single person, it might have a different interaction in what it does for that individual, because we are all each individual. Can we prove this? I don't think we've proved this yet, but it's a good question anyway, I think, to think about.
so the
Maybe
answer,
we'll do a test on that.
right, okay, so therefore we can only conclude that there is some additional source of energy, whether it's from them or whether once the DNA is connected to that channel, it keeps, resonating and soaking up the energy, or the environment. Again, we're back to that. But the control situation, when there is no treatment, the conductivity goes down. So, to what role the environment has, we don't know. And it's a complicated situation. Okay, so that's a series of experiments that right there are interesting enough. And then okay, so then we did some experiments. Okay, we're at
Well,
the
and
logical.
before you go on to the next experiment, one
Yeah,
thing I want to point out here, that you and I discussed, was that the actual, and tell me if I'm wrong in saying this, the measurement that you took on the Arcturian commander, it actually changed, which was different than all the others that we worked with.
what do you mean it changed? What
It
changed?
what I will say, the frequency changed. Um, that's what I remember you saying something about that to me. Just trying to find my notes on that, but yeah, frequency, it just changed.
Well, if the
It was a different
but we measured
frequency,
it from. I mean, what do you
whatever
mean
you measured.
from treatment to treatment or from minute to minute?
No, from, yeah, in the time, what do you call it? The time course, it had changed. So it was this, and now it was this. And that wasn't the amount or the percentage, but it had just changed itself. And I remember that specifically because I thought, is that something that the commander actually instilled within that energy? Did it create, I'm assuming that it did create the capacity to change that very specifically. And I've not asked him about that, and that could be a question I ask. But I remember that very specifically, that was such an odd thing that happened, you said. So, okay, well, we'll leave that at that because we
Yeah, what,
don't have
okay.
much information on that, but I do remember. So,
Okay,
okay, go ahead.
so the audience should understand that this is a very complicated procedure, and we've been working together for a while, but every time we do an experiment, there's 10 more to do to answer these kind of questions.
Right,
And it's I don't know too many other scientists are doing these kind of experiment. I don't think anybody is. But who knows what they're doing in Transylvania or Lithuania or whatever in Europe. But anyway, so okay, so that's experiments treating the DNA directly. Then the next series of experiments I'd like to talk about is the what I proposed in the introduction. Can we store this energy? And what's the best storage medium? So Laurie did this channeling and asked that question to her guides, and they said very specifically to combine water with silica and nanoparticles of gold and pyrite, which is a crystal. So I thought that was awesome information, and I went and bought some pyrite, and I put it in the water in the sunlight for an hour, and then I added silica, and then I added nano gold, which itself, by the way, is a quantum entity. So we're really creating a whole new kind of carrier to resonate with the different kind of energies here, and rather than just the DNA molecule itself. So in these experiments, what kind of energy was going into the what we call the PAS system? Pyrite,
Um,
gold, and silver, silica.
I was using my energy specifically to have an effect on what we call the PAS, the pyrite, gold, and silica.
So
Um,
this is different than any of the entities. Do you think any entities were coming through just because you're connected to them, or you didn't call on them?
I didn't call on anyone specifically. I just went into the place that I normally do and and just felt the energy, and it felt very powerful to me. I can remember. Um, and but I didn't call in anything specifically.
Specific energy. Okay, so this is the energy, more like the energy of a healer rather than the energy of an entity. And those kind of experiments have been done before by other scientists,
Mhm.
although not measuring changes in DNA. So here we're working with a different kind of energy than the entities that she channels. Okay, so what happened with we did what we did was we did distilled water and this mixture, the crystal water. We'll call it crystal water because there's crystals and other things, but versus just regular distilled water. At the same time, since there's so much variation from treatment to treatment, from day to day, to compare how well water does with water with all of the crystals and etc. in the water, we have to expose them both samples to the same energy at the same time. And then we could say that, okay, well, it turns out in that experiment, they all three gave initially, right after the treatment was for maybe 10 minutes. Then I measured it right away, and there was about a 50% increase in conductivity for all three uh, uh, samples that were treated, whether it's water or two, sorry, just the two, the water or the crystal water. And then we said, okay, well, that's interesting. But the real question was, how long does it last? And 12 days later, almost just shy of 2 weeks, I did the same experiment again, and the water went from 50% down to 30%, which is what you'd expect. You'd expect the energy in the water will dissipate over time, not grow over time. Oh, now remember, the last experiments we did with the entities was only 24 hours. So yes, it gradually increased over 24 hours, but I didn't take it for 2 weeks. So these experiments with Laurie's energy, we waited for 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks to take the measurement, and therefore it was less effective. The energy does dissipate, but the fact that it was 30% instead of 50%, it's still a robust effect. And I've done other experiments with other healers, and every healer is different, etc. but this energy can stay in distilled water for as much as 2 months. So, healers can actually treat large numbers of people this way rather than just one-on-one. And it does last, although it gradually decreases in efficacy over the course of several weeks. But in this particular experiment, after 2 weeks, the sample treated with the crystal was a little higher. It was 40%. So it came down, it actually started at 60% and went down to 40% after 2 weeks. So it decreases, and it actually more or less is quite similar because it started higher. It after 2 weeks was a little higher. So it went from 60 to 40 versus 50 to 30. That's a 20% difference. So there was no difference at all between the two different carriers of this kind of energy. Now, we should probably repeat that experiment, and what we did repeat it with similar results, but we didn't do longer than 2 weeks. We should probably continue that experiment and do a 1 month and a 2 month experiment. But the problem when we work together is we generate so many different ideas that in a given session, we're I'm trying. I've always Laurie's always got all these ideas. I've got all these ideas. I'm trying to keep it simple so when we interpret the results, we can be consistent and have some idea about the conclusion without making the system so complicated. So those are the results that we got with this magic crystal water, which so far doesn't seem to be any better than using regular water. Now, regular water itself, of course, is there are all kinds of waters, and here we're using distilled water because in my experiments with different kinds of waters, um, they're all different because they all have different minerals.
So
In the
Glenn,
next experiment,
wait, before we go on to the
the
next
next experiment,
experiment,
okay,
Glenn, do you remember the time, this was early on us working together, and you handed me a bottle of liquid vitamin C. It was a high caliber vitamin C, very good quality. Do you remember that?
yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. Well, that's a whole
And
different experiment, but go
right,
ahead.
but it is a substance. It's it's a vitamin, but it's a substance. And when you had measured it prior, and then you measured it after. During, I can remember this in my mind, which I don't remember a lot of things, but this I do remember. I remembered the energy started to swirl very strong, very fast. And then when it swirled around the vitamin C, and then this ball of energy showed up in the energy that was swirling around it. And I believe it was an electron that you said showed up. So when we were, and tell me if I'm wrong, okay? Um, um, when you measured it after, it was 62% higher electrical energy in it than prior to when you measured it prior to.
Okay, so the that was kind of a different experiment,
Right.
not within the theme of what we're talking about here about the abilities of healers and entities to affect DNA, but it was a naturally extracted herb. The vitamin C came from a plant, and it was extracted and stabilized in a glycerin water matrix.
Mm.
And the question was, there was a fair amount of energy in the product itself because it has a lot of life force. And the company that we did these experiments with called Global Healing prides themselves in making products that have a lot of energy and intrinsic energy, what would be the life force of the plant in this case. Yeah, another whole kind of energy. But the fact that Laurie was able to increase it by that much just shows us that she's pumping out, some amazing kind of energy. It seems to affect water, if DNA, and people. So that's the results from that.
So in my question or wonderment, and we never did check in on this, how long that energy would have
Right.
lasted,
Right.
and that would be probably a really good experiment, because if we as humans can do that, if we can increase what we're holding, like it's put like taking a glass of water and increasing the energy, or our food that we eat, or whatever it is that we do, it's sort of like the intention, or what you might say a prayer is an intention, whatever it is that you do to put in to have an effect like this, that we can have. This shows that we can have this kind of an effect on what it is that we put our intention into.
Yes, there's a scientist who has done, well, a healer actually, in Europe, who has done a lot of work in this area, because he sells products that he has energized, and with similar results. I mean, this is, everything from a bottle of vitamin C to treating a cow before they kill it and get the meat. And
Mm,
then the meat that comes out of the energized cow is higher quality and has a better effect on our body. And Which is a whole, another topic of conversation, which we could elaborate on. But uh, the fact that that yes, this and those my experiments and those experiments demonstrate that we all have the ability to do that. Laurie is particularly strong in her abilities to do that, but we can all do that, and we do that when we bless our foods and
mm,
our water. I mean, I could think of an example of a healer that I knew who, he didn't want to it wasn't a question of putting energy in. It was a question of pulling out the alcohol
mm,
from wine. This guy loved the taste of wine, but he didn't want to get drunk. So with his energy, he pulled the alcohol out of the wine and then drank it and didn't get drunk. I mean, this energy can be used in a lot of different ways, and that's a little sidetrack to what we're focusing on. So let's go back to what we're focusing on,
sure.
and let's talk about different kinds of waters, because I've done a lot. So if water is the same as crystal water, uh, what water is best to use? And I've done some work with this, comparing distilled water with various spring waters that are commercially available,
Mm,
and they're all different. The carriers are all different. Some are better than others, but it turns out this distilled water is one of the best,
mhm,
and that suggests that, to me, that when you heal spring water, yes, you have the water, the H2O molecule, but you also have all these minerals.
mhm,
And I think that the minerals absorb the energy from the healer and utilize it. And the energy from the healer is not stored in the water,
mm,
it's kind of used up by the mineral. So that's why distilled water works best, because there are no minerals in
mm.
terms of carrying the information. So that's what I've done in the past. And then Laurie does one better on me. She comes back with all these samples from Europe, from sacred sites in Europe. Why don't you share with the audience the three different kinds of waters that you came back with?
Okay. So one of them was in south of France, Haute-Liban, and it was the town that Nostradamus lived in, and his house is still there. And it's the townspeople go to this particular flowing body of water. It's a small, small river, and they get their water in jugs, and they're very healthy people. They live a very long life there. And so for me, I was really curious, and I just took a little sample of it so that I could bring it back and we could measure it, because I wanted to know how this affects the DNA. And so this bottle of water, I took it in probably, end of August, early September of 23. And it was months before I actually gave it to you, Glenn, to measure. So there it sat. It just sat in a, in its own little spot on my shelf. That was it. Nothing touched it. Although, do we have to touch something to have an effect? Well, okay, probably not. So, but there it sat untouched. And then the second bottle was Lourdes water, and taken from Lourdes in France, where Mother Mary appeared to Bernadette, a young girl of 9 years old, and asked her repeatedly to build a shrine for healing for people. So I took and I took a sample of the running water that came out of the rocks, the stones, the cave where she showed up. There's running water consistently. It's just always running. This is how long ago? I don't even know the date that she showed up, but it was, oh gosh, probably about 400 and something years ago. I don't know exactly. I don't remember the date. And then they sell also samples in little bottles. I'll just grab one, okay, like this. And you can buy them like this, okay? And they supposedly have the water from Lourdes, from the running water. But I wanted to see if it was different than the water that I got right as it was running. Just matter of experiment. So the first one was the number 2. That was the Atlabon. And so we have 2 different kinds of gauges here. So we have real and imaginary. And
Okay.
I want you to explain this as best
That's
you
my
can, what real and
so,
imaginary is,
so
before we really tell about this.
well, okay, but before we even get to that,
Okay.
but you didn't treat the waters, but you activated the waters. Could you
Yes.
elaborate on that?
And yeah, so this is really important, and we have found this throughout our research. Although I don't know that it was that apparent in the beginning, but it's certainly very apparent now. Activation is very much a key. And so, and we're going to talk about this down a little bit ways when we talk about the codes and that we did. But activation is like this. If you have a piece of paper like this paper, and it's got some words on it or whatever, it's not activated. It's not engaged with something. So there's engagement and disengagement. Engagement is you are activating, you are engaging, you are connecting to that which, fill in the blank, whether it be the water, crystals, whatever you're engaging, energy, you are engaging, you are opening to access what is held in that. That's an activation. So everything we've worked with, we activated, but we have measured words, and we'll talk about this when we get to the codes, right? That we did an experiment of just the words, and then we did an experiment with activating the codes. So, okay.
Those are the different waters, and they've been activated, or opened up, or awakened, shall we say?
Right.
Okay, so in these experiments, it turns out that none of the waters had any effect on DNA. And why is that? Well, we know for a fact that Lourdes water does not work unless you drink it straight from the fountain. I found that out by someone who had been there and and told me that the water just doesn't last. If you take it back, what a lot of people do, they put it in a bottle, they bring it back to their hotel,
Right.
and I don't know how long it lasts, but certainly not for months. By the
Right.
time Laurie
Right.
got it, even just a couple of hours, I think it will dissipate and not have any effect on the DNA. But what's interesting about these experiments is what Laurie spilled the beans here. So now I have to explain what I measured uh, when measuring these particular samples. I, in addition to measuring the regular conductivity, but I measured something else. So I don't actually measure conductivity. I measure impedance or resistance, which is like the resistance of flow of energy. And my device actually gives me a measurement of the real and the imaginary components of the impedance. So now this is opening up Pandora's box here, because the fact that impedance has an imaginary component to it is quite intriguing, and I become obsessed lately with what that means, because from an electrical engineering point of view, you have a value. You measure the resistance of flow of energy, and then they go, well, oh, you can also, that's real, the real number, but you can also get an imaginary number. And I'm going, well, what is an imaginary number? Where does that come from? And it turns out that in mathematics, uh, in order to explain and apply mathematics to real world situations,
Mm.
oftentimes you have to look at both the real and the imaginary part of a particular uh, measurement. And mathematics allows for imaginary numbers. They allow for infinities. They allow for negative concepts like time, like negative time. What does that mean? Well, that means that time doesn't only go from a mathematics point of view. That math doesn't always have a positive increasing value. It can also have a negative value. Energy itself can have a negative value. The fact that pure mathematics allows for these uh, bizarre phenomena is quite intriguing. And it should be known that all of quantum physics is based on mathematics. So quantum physics, therefore, allows these kind of anomalous numbers, like imaginary numbers. And imaginary numbers I read an article where they described imaginary numbers as the magic property well, in this case where they were talking about impedance, imaginary impedance of water, and they use that to describe the magical properties of the water. And I'm going, okay, well, imaginary numbers are quite intriguing. Imaginary impedance is quite interesting. So was able to measure the imaginary impedance or the imaginary conductivity, as well as the real. And what I've been doing recently is taking the ratio of the two, because the higher that ratio is, the more important is the imaginary part, and the less important is the real part. And in doing this kind of experiments, I've been able to show that normally that ratio is less than one when you treat a sample with an electromagnetic field. The ratio is pretty low. Now, when you treat water with a scalar field, the ratio goes from 1 to about 2. So it doubles, which is interesting. And then when you treat when Laurie activates these very different waters, the okay, so the Lord's water we did twice, and the first time she activated. I don't. You can elaborate on the difference between the first and the second one. But the first time we did Lourdes water, and I measured the ratio was 0.7, which is exactly what it should be. That's normal. But the second time I measured the Lourdes water, the ratio was 9, which is ridiculously high. And that was very intriguing. And then the water from Notre Dame's place in home in France, the ratio was as high as 13.
Mm.
So ratios around 10 are just ridiculously high and show us that the imaginary component is way more important, and it's what's really changing. The real numbers hardly change at all, but the imaginary numbers changed a lot.
Mhm.
And this is which is quite an interesting observation, and something I need to do more research on. Okay, so do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and I will add this at the end of this particular video because I think it's quite fascinating. So when I recorded reading and transmitting the information from these waters, and we measured them together also, and they were came in very strong all together. What I heard, this was the first thing I heard, the water energy is brought from the heavens. Now, I have to say that's probably one of the only times I've ever heard it depicted that way, that it comes from the heavens. It's just an unusual way for that expression. And it talked about very specifically a halo, and which is the solar disk. And the halo, it's depicted in art, goes way, way back to the Atlantean times and probably before that. But it talked about the halo, it talked about the light, it talked about the lineage of the divinity of Mary, Yeshua, and such. And I will talk more about this later. But I thought this was an interesting component of what was coming through energetically while I was reading, and then you were gauging these on the equipment. So just wanted to add that little piece to it. And I think we should probably look more at the imaginary and understand the effects that it has on the DNA and what that is. I'm curious.
That's what I'm in the middle of doing.
Yeah.
So we've been talking for well over an hour. Do you want to continue, or you want to do a whole separate one on the UFO side of the lecture here?
We let's keep talking, and then they'll the web people, they'll separate it.
Yeah, because it's now we're moving into another whole different type of energy, not from that's why it's like to me it's a whole different lecture. It's not from heaven. Well, not
Right.
well, who knows where it's coming from, but not from a Laurie or not from her guides. Well, we sort of implied this, that the energy in these different waters is there, and it's mostly in the imaginary part of the spectrum. But we looked at various UFO related entities, a Stargate Circle, the light language, words, and a piece of a spaceship. So this is a whole explanation, which Laurie can go on for hours and hours. You want to just briefly describe all 4 of those?
Sure. So the spaceship piece was given to me. When I was reading it, it was explaining to me that it had crystallized here on Earth, but that was not the format that it moved through space and time. So it wasn't its original format, but that was it now. And so it transmitted information, and we have that gauged on your equipment. Um, what you call the light language, I'll call the codes. These codes have been given. These codes are amazing, and I will talk more about this in time. But these codes, they read like a book. They are a book that gives us information for our lives today. They actually have the capacity, as I'm finding out, the more I work with them, the longer I work, that they can meet you at the level of your understanding and provide information. And so every time I activate and work and transmit, either whether it be with someone or for my own personal hearing of transmission, they tell me something different. They take me somewhere different. They open me up to new information. And so it's always evolving, this information. And yet sometimes it's just pieces of information that I'm getting, and there's more to be understood. But I think that's really quite interesting for me, because it's a lot to wrap my head around, and I have to get to a certain point of understanding before it's ready to share more information. Because it would be like speaking a foreign language. I would not understand it. So I have to understand in order to keep moving in the flow of the way it is transmitting information to me. But again, they are super powerful with what they bring. I've transmitted them to people, and the information that people are telling me and what's happening with them, it's all unique and different for each person, but it amazes me. It knocks my socks off, literally. So it's quite powerful. And to date, my understanding is that what you have gauged on your equipment, they carry the highest percentage of energy that you've been able to uh, uh, research and run through your
Measure.
equipment. Measure,
Okay,
yeah,
well,
thank you.
okay. So that's the second kind of energy, and then we have the words, Sheila's words.
Oh, the words, yes. So Sheila Seppi gave me 12 the 12 chakras and information that she had received. And so I asked if I could run those through your equipment also, and we could find out more of how they also conduct energy and how their effect is. So the words, yes. Okay.
The last one was the spaceship, I guess.
Oh, I
No, you
think we
started
talked
no with
about
the circle. You did that already. Sorry, the
yeah.
circle, the Stargate circle.
Oh, the circle, yes, the Stargate, yeah, and I think that has a lot more energy still holding, but, yes, so that was drawn out by someone and asked for me to also activate and transmit the information from that and the energy from that, so, yeah. Okay, so those are the 4
Okay,
different
okay.
ones we did. Mhm.
Okay, so and the results are uh, interesting in themselves. So the spaceship itself caused an 18% uh, change, increase in the conductivity of the DNA, and the codes caused a 16% increase in the conductivity of DNA. That is to say, uh, the codes that were not activated. So they were just written or in and Xerox. By the way, this is not like the energy of the person who wrote it is still there because it was Xeroxed. And then the DNA sample was placed on top of the page with the words on top of the spaceship. And I've done these kind of experiments before with objects all objects or even pictures, whereby you can measure the energy that's coming off of the photograph or the object. These are the kind of experiments. Again, in this case, it does, like I said in the introduction, it takes a whole hour because the energy is very subtle. It's very weak. And in order to produce an effect on a real effect, a measurable effect on a biological molecule like DNA, it's got to sit there for a while. So those two, and when I say 16, 18% effect, that's with the real numbers. The other thing that we measured had no effect at all. Not everything does change DNA, although DNA is pretty sensitive to most energies. But the Stargate circle and the channeled words had no effect when I measured the real component. But all of these things had a rather large effect when I measured the imaginary numbers. So and the magnitude of the effect with the imaginary numbers is between 50 and 60, 70%, 50 and 70% increase in conductivity when you use the imaginary numbers. Then if you take the ratio, or if you remember before, the ratio about 1 is a normal electromagnetic field. The spaceship gave a ratio of 3, and the circle gave a ratio of 15. The words gave a ratio of 12, and the codes gave a ratio of 4. So anything over greater than 1 is highly significant. But when you get it high as 12, 15%, that's kind of ridiculous. Actually, it's quite high. But the other thing worth mentioning is the fact that I should have, when I was talking about the codes. Okay, the codes gave 16% effect when they were not activated. But then after Laurie activated the code, so she'd take the piece of paper with the words, with the light language written on the piece of paper. She just activated that page, and then the real number, the real conductivity, the ordinary conductivity went up from 16% to 60% by the activation process, which is very important conclusion I missed out there. And the ratio of imaginary to real was about the same, but the real component increased enormously, whereas in other situations, that's not the case. This is a rather unusual thing. The imaginary didn't increase. It did also increase. Actually, I'm sorry. The imaginary also increased, but the ratio of the two was about the same after activating it. So that makes it even more complicated. But the conclusion here is that these different sources of energy have a relatively small effect on the conductivity when you measure the real component, but when you measure the imaginary component, it's really large effects. Anything to add?
What do I want to add to it? Well, they all, I'll say they all feel different working with each one of them. It's its own unique feeling. The codes continue to amaze me at what they bring forward and their capacity with a person, how it affects the person and how lasting the effect is. And how I know this is because I check back in with people that I've worked with in activating these codes with them, transmitting. And it is long term. So initially what they receive, and then longer term over weeks, months. it still is there. It's still lasting. So I feel that part of this work is about understanding how it really affects us. This is important for us to understand. And yes, we're trying to figure it out scientifically what it is by measuring it, gauging it through equipment. And yet also at the same time, just by seeing or feeling what is happening simultaneous. So using everything that we possibly can to gauge it. I guess that's just what I would add to it.
Well, let me just
What
add
else?
to,
Go
as
on, please.
as a final statement, to elaborate on what you just said, how these energies affect us. What I'm measuring in the lab is the effect it has on an isolated molecule separated from the body, surrounded by a very unnatural aqueous environment, distilled water. So this is one measure that I happen to use in my lab because DNA is quite sensitive to different energies. But ultimately, what Laurie said is the question that we really want to know is how it affects us as a human being, a complex human being with lots of molecules and lots of different components, let alone physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, lots of different levels. So those are complicated, and ultimately how these energies affect us is important, and how they promote the healing process for me is particularly important. And just opening up Pandora's box here, because we don't really know how these energies affect us scientifically. Laurie has experiences from the people she's been working with, and everyone, I imagine, has a different experience. But here we're trying to make it scientific and to quantify these changes, although we're measuring only at the molecular level. And obviously, people are way much more complicated than just a single molecule of DNA floating around in water. Nonetheless, we do have valuable information, which we appreciate the opportunity to share with everybody, and hope these experiments and these conclusions help people to understand that this is real, that these are real physical, electrical energy changes that we can measure in the lab in response to these very exotic forms of subtle energy.
Yeah, so okay, so going back on a little bit back into that, when we measured the DNA on just the words themselves, it was very minimal energy that was shifting, okay? But when they were activated, and when I say activated, it's an engagement, engaging with another energy. It became that energy that was being transmitted. I want to say it woke up and started to communicate certain information that was necessary to bring it to a certain level percentage that you measured, right?
And anyway, sweetie, on that positive note, I have to go. If you want to keep talking, I just realized I have a meeting, another meeting. So thank you everyone for listening. Laurie, please continue if you want to elaborate. But I'm signing out. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye for
Glenn.
now.
Thank you. So just it may have been a little long-winded, our discussion, and possibly kind of heady for an average person that doesn't have this background in the sciences. And it takes me quite a bit to understand it. Although I've always been super intrigued about science. It probably was my very favorite class in school, one that I did not fall asleep in, was science and biology. And that, it still holds that way today. I am intrigued by what comes through. So, when we were talking about just a few moments ago about how the water with the DNA was placed just on the paper with the words and get sat there for an hour, okay, and everything was measured 1 hour after. That was our gauge that we kept, the golden rule for everything. And so when Glenn measured it, it came in very, very minimal. It was not much energy, not much change at all. And that's because they're just photographed words, right? Or symbols. What's the difference? Words, symbols, it's just whatever the energy that's behind it, okay? Did not activate. But when I put my hand on the words and held the DNA and transmitted to the DNA, and then we measured the DNA and I recorded at the same time. I always record what the information that's being transmitted so that one, I can understand at that level, and then two, we also measure it on the equipment. From my recollection, I believe Glenn said that it increased by 142%, which is off the charts high for any activation of any kind that he has measured. So it was quite, I was super impressed by that. He was, as a scientist also. Um, it it's fascinating, and these codes just continue to open up and present information. They are like puzzle pieces, like I explained. They only share until I get a greater understanding of what it's sharing, and then moving into the next level of information, which is important to both Glenn and myself. I'd on top of this, or as a side note, there has been some new information that has come about through these codes. And it is about healing, actual healing, and it is actually connected to Sirius and Lemuria. So that will be in another video that I will be putting out soon. That I really want to discuss it with Glenn, and then I'll have more information about it. But there's a lot coming about with healing on that. So I'm really happy that you could spend time with me with this and with Glenn, and have hopefully a little bit greater understanding in how this works, and that this is actually quantified information now, that we have physical proof of what is happening. And like Glenn said, you get to a certain point with information, and then you have 10 more questions that come out of it. And these questions, they're just continually helping us to evolve and grow. So I receive all kinds of things that come to me that people ask me to read. And I was intrigued by this little piece of spaceship, and how we know it's a spaceship. It has been read by numerous people that all say the same thing. It is a spaceship, and that there were pieces of this. And one of them I got a hold of because of being intrigued about what information it has. And I may talk about that more in an upcoming video also. But it's fascinating to hold this energy of this spaceship, and it opens up a whole lot of information about what the spaceship is about and the interaction with it and all. And I'll definitely do a video just specifically about that coming up. So there's a lot of information that comes through in the different pieces of things that come to me, the different people's DNA and information that comes specifically from each individual, and what the energies that we connect with, that I transmit, each being very different in what it has to say. So more of that in videos to come also. So I hope you'll stay tuned with me and learn. This is such a great exploration and really intriguing and fascinating. So thanks again for being with me during this time, and I'll see you at the next video. All right. Be blessed.